What the crew of the Liaoning dig saw inside the fossil that they couldn't explain. The crew at the Liaoning quarry stopped believing the textbooks in the winter of 1996. That was the season a farmer walked in with a rock, split it open, and handed them a dinosaur that wasn't supposed to exist. His name was Liaoning. The village was called Sihatun, in the northeast corner of China, hours from any city, surrounded by frozen fields and low hills stitched together with dirt roads. Li was a farmer, not a scientist. He had been picking through the shale outcrops near his village for years, looking for fossil fish to sell. That was the local trade. Split a rock, find a fish, hand it to a middleman who took it south. Nobody in the village had ever expected to find anything else in the ground. The rock he brought to the local museum that winter was a slab of grey shale, about the size of a dinner plate. When the curators split it along the natural bedding plane, the two halves came apart like a book. Inside was a small two-legged predator, curled up in death, with a dark halo of something running down its spine. Fuzz. Filaments. A coat of primitive feathers on an animal that, according to a century of paleontology, should have been covered in scales. The curators knew immediately they weren't qualified to describe what they were looking at. They put the slab in a locked cabinet and made a phone call to Beijing. That was the opening. It got stranger from there. This isn't a story about one fossil. It's a story about a place. The Liaoning province contains a series of ancient lake beds that preserved the early Cretaceous in a way no other site on Earth has managed. The rocks there don't just hold bones, they hold feathers, skin, stomach contents, the last meal of a 125-million-year-old predator still sitting inside the ribcage where it died. And what the crew kept pulling out of the ground year after year, dig after dig, were animals that did not match anything in the textbooks, not even close. We need to start with the ground itself, because the ground is why any of this survived. The Yixian Formation, which is what geologists call these layers of rock, was laid down during the Early Cretaceous, about 125 million years ago. Back then, this part of Asia was a valley surrounded by active volcanoes. The valley held shallow lakes, and every few decades or centuries, one of those volcanoes would erupt and blanket the region in a thick layer of ash. Anything living near the water when the ash came down got buried almost instantly. No decay, no scavengers pulling the body apart. Just a rapid seal of fine volcanic sediment that preserved everything down to individual filaments of feather. Paleontologists call this kind of preservation a Lagerstätte, pronounced L-H-G-E-R-Stätte. It's a German word that translates roughly to resting place. There are only a handful of these sites in the world. Liaoning is the crown jewel. The first hint of what was in the ground came from local farmers who had been finding fish fossils in the shale for generations. They'd split slabs of rock in their fields and pull out perfectly preserved fish, then sell them to collectors for pocket change. Nobody was looking for dinosaurs. Nobody expected them. Then Liaoning found his rock, and everything shifted. The specimen he found was named Sinosauropteryx, pronounced Sinosauropteryx. It was small, about the size of a house cat, a two-legged carnivorous dinosaur, what paleontologists call a theropod. And running down its back, its tail, and along its underside was a fringe of dark filaments. Not scales, not modern feathers, something in between, something nobody had ever documented on a non-bird dinosaur before. The crew who arrived at the site was a mix of Chinese paleontologists from the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology in Beijing and Western researchers who flew in as soon as word got out. Ji Qiang, a paleontologist who had been working the region for years, took the lead. The moment they saw the specimen up close, they knew they were looking at something that was going to detonate a century of assumptions about what dinosaurs actually looked like. For decades, the consensus had been that dinosaurs were basically enormous reptiles, scaly, cold-blooded, slow. Sinosauropteryx broke that picture in a single afternoon. That was the opening. The real problem started when they went back for the next season. The second dig produced a specimen called Quarry, pronounced Quarry. This one wasn't just fuzzy, it had actual feathers, long, symmetrical, structured feathers along its arms and tail, the kind of feathers you would find on a modern peacock. And Quarry wasn't a bird. It couldn't fly. Its arms were too short and the feathers were the wrong shape for lift. It was clearly, unmistakably, a dinosaur wearing plumage. The crew photographed it, described it, and shipped it back to Beijing. Then they found another one and another one. And then, in a slab pulled from an ash layer near the base of the formation, they found something that stopped the entire operation cold. Microraptor, pronounced Microraptor. 4 wings, not 2, 4. Full flight feathers on both its arms and its legs. A small predator, about 3 feet long, with feathered limbs at all 4 corners of its body. The crew who pulled the first Microraptor out of the shale spent hours arguing about what they were looking at. Nothing alive today has 4 wings. Nothing in the fossil record had 4 wings before this. The animal had been buried in ash so quickly that the individual feather barbs were still visible under a magnifying glass. You could count them. The problem wasn't just that it existed. The problem was what it meant. If Microraptor could glide with 4 feathered limbs, then the transition from ground-dwelling dinosaurs to flying birds was messier and stranger than anyone had guessed. There wasn't a clean line from scales to feathers to flight. There were experiments, failed prototypes, dead ends that ran for millions of years and then collapsed. Microraptor was one of those experiments. The fact that it lived side by side with more conventional bird ancestors meant early Cretaceous China was hosting a kind of arms race in the trees. Multiple lineages, all trying to solve the same problem in different ways. Now step back for a moment, because this is where the story gets harder to swallow. The crew wasn't finding 1 or 2 feathered dinosaurs, they were finding them by the dozens. Different species, different sizes, different arrangements of feathers. Some had fuzz, some had contour feathers, some had full flight feathers, some had feathers on their heads and necks but scales on their legs. The Yixian Formation was preserving an entire ecosystem where feathered dinosaurs weren't the exception. They were the norm. If you walked through this valley 125 million years ago, most of the small and medium-sized predators around you would have looked more like angry roadrunners than the scaly reptiles Mark grew up watching on the big screen. Then came the specimen that nobody wanted to publish first. In the mid-2000s, a farmer brought in a slab of shale containing a 2-foot theropod. When the preparators back at the institute cleaned it up, they found the animal had died with its stomach intact. Preserved inside the rib cage was a small mammal, a whole one, almost intact. Bones, fur outline, teeth. You could see which end had been swallowed first. This was the first direct evidence of a dinosaur eating a mammal, not inferred, not reconstructed. Actual stomach contents, frozen in ash, preserved for 125 million years. The crew who prepared that specimen worked in silence for weeks. The standard narrative, the one every paleontology textbook taught, was that mammals during the age of dinosaurs were tiny, nocturnal, shrew-like creatures hiding in the underbrush. The dinosaurs ate plants or other dinosaurs. Mammals were background noise. This fossil said otherwise. Mammals were on the menu, regularly enough that a predator died with one still in its stomach. Then a mammal called Repenomamus, pronounced Repenomamus, started showing up in the quarry, and Repenomamus wasn't shrew-sized. The largest specimen was the size of a badger, about 3 feet long, weighing around 30 pounds. One of them was found with a baby dinosaur in its stomach. Let that image settle. A mammal in the age of dinosaurs that ate baby dinosaurs. The predator-prey relationship for a century had run one way. Now it was running both ways. Small dinosaurs ate small mammals. Bigger mammals ate baby dinosaurs. The floor of the food web was more chaotic than anyone had drawn it, and Liaoning was the first site to prove it with actual gut contents. We still haven't talked about the color of these animals, because Liaoning didn't just preserve the shapes. In some of the specimens, it preserved the pigment. In 2010, a team led by Jacob Vinther and Mike Benton examined the feathers of Sinosauropteryx under an electron microscope. What they were looking for were melanosomes. These are tiny cellular structures that produce pigment. In modern birds, the shape of a melanosome corresponds to a specific color. Round ones make red or brown. Long, thin ones make black. The team found melanosomes preserved in the Sinosauropteryx feathers, perfectly preserved. And when they mapped the distribution, they discovered the animal had a chestnut-brown back, a white underside, and a striped tail, like a red panda or a lemur. Nobody had ever known the color of a dinosaur before. For over 150 years, every dinosaur reconstruction had been a guess. Green because reptiles are green, grey because elephants are grey. Now, for the first time, we had data. The data said this small predator was patterned like a modern forest mammal, camouflaged, counter-shaded, adapted to a life spent hiding and hunting in dense undergrowth. The same technique was applied to Microraptor. The result came back as iridescent black, like a raven, a dinosaur that shimmered blue-green in the sunlight, with 4 feathered wings, gliding between trees in a Cretaceous forest. That's not a movie image. That's what the melanosomes said. And the iridescence itself carries meaning. In modern birds, iridescent plumage is almost always a signal used for mating displays. That means Microraptor wasn't just gliding through the Cretaceous forest. It was showing off. It had a courtship ritual, a visual language, a social life complex enough that shimmering feathers gave it an evolutionary edge. Here's where the crew ran into a problem they couldn't solve. Some of the specimens didn't behave. There was a mid-sized theropod pulled from the quarry that had feathers on its arms and tail but scales on its body. There was another that seemed to have both quill knobs, the anchor points for large flight feathers, and skin impressions that showed pebbled scaly texture right next to them. There was a specimen that had what looked like proto-feathers, but they were arranged in ways that didn't match any known feather development pattern. Something had grown a fuzzy coat, but not in the way birds grow theirs. For a while, some paleontologists argued that these strange filaments weren't feathers at all. They were collagen fibers from the animal's skin, decayed and preserved as dark shadows. The debate got heated. Some of the biggest names in the field took opposing positions. The specimens sat in museum drawers while the argument played out in journals. Not every paleontologist agreed with the feather interpretation, and honestly, in a handful of cases, the disagreement still hasn't fully resolved. The consensus that eventually formed, and the one most researchers accept today, is that feathers are much older and much more widespread among dinosaurs than we ever imagined. They probably didn't start as flight structures. They started as insulation, simple filaments that trapped body heat. Then, over millions of years, in some lineages, they got more complex. They developed color for signaling. They got longer for display. Eventually, in one specific branch, they got aerodynamic enough to catch air. Flight came last. Feathers came first by a wide margin. This means something the crew at Liaoning was among the first to accept even before the rest of the field caught up. If feathers are ancient and widespread, then most of the dinosaurs we picture as scaly monsters were probably fuzzy or feathered in some way, especially the theropods, especially the smaller ones, especially the young ones. That includes the relatives of Tyrannosaurus rex. There is now direct fossil evidence that some tyrannosaur species were covered in a downy coat, at least during part of their lives. The largest known feathered dinosaur is Yutyrannus, pronounced Yutyrannus, a 30-foot cousin of T-Rex, pulled from the same Liaoning beds. It weighed about 1.5 tons. It had feathers. Picture a school bus-length predator covered in shaggy fuzz moving through a snowy Cretaceous forest. That's not speculation. That's a fossil sitting in a Beijing museum right now. The crew has kept digging. Every year the site produces new species. Some of them force revisions to the family tree before they even get formally named. And with each new find, the picture of what the early Cretaceous actually looked like keeps drifting further from the one Mark learned as a kid. There is one specimen still haunting the researchers. It was pulled out of the quarry in 2015 in a slab about the size of a coffee table. The animal inside was small, no more than 18 inches long. It had wings, it had teeth, it had a long, bony tail, and it had membranes stretched between its fingers like a bat, not feathers, actual skin membranes held up by an elongated wrist bone that doesn't exist in any other known dinosaur. The species was named Yiqi, pronounced Yi-Chi, which means strange wing in Mandarin. It's the shortest scientific name in the fossil record, and it belongs to a dinosaur that tried to fly with bat wings. Yi-Chi lived alongside the four-winged Microraptor. Both were experimenting with gliding. Neither of them survived long as a lineage. Both of them are dead ends, but the fact that they existed at the same time, in the same forest, means the early Cretaceous was a laboratory for aerial locomotion. Small predators were trying every possible solution: feathered wings, bat wings, forewings. Some of them worked, most of them didn't. The ones that worked eventually became every bird alive on Earth today. The ones that didn't ended up in the ash, waiting 125 million years for a farmer with a hammer. That's the thing about the Liaoning specimens that keeps pulling paleontologists back to the site. It's not just the preservation, though the preservation is unmatched. It's the sense that you're looking at an experiment in progress, a snapshot of evolution mid-swing, before natural selection had finished sorting out which body plans would inherit the sky and which would end up as footnotes. If you were standing in that valley 125 million years ago, at dusk, you would hear things you don't hear in any modern forest. Small predators calling to each other in low chirps. The rustle of Microraptor gliding between branches, its four wings catching the last light and throwing off flashes of blue-green iridescence. Something the size of a badger, 30 pounds of muscle and teeth, moving through the leaf litter with a baby dinosaur clamped in its jaws. Yutyrannus somewhere in the distance, shaking snow off its feathered flanks. A Yi-Chi launching from a branch and gliding on membranes that no lineage on Earth would ever repeat. Under all of it, the low hum of an active volcano waiting to bury everything for our benefit. Every crew that has worked at Liaoning has come away with the same feeling, that the animals in the ground don't fit the story we told ourselves, that the early Cretaceous was weirder, more chaotic, more experimental than any museum diorama has ever depicted. The dinosaurs there weren't just running around eating each other, they were becoming birds. Some were losing feathers back to scales, some were growing bat wings and dying, some were being eaten by mammals the size of dogs, some were, in a few unforgettable cases, dinner for the very lineage that would eventually inherit the world after them. And honestly, this is the part of the story that still gets to me. The crew is still digging. New species come out every year. Every new find pushes the story further from the one Mark grew up with. The feathered predators, the mammal-eating dinosaurs, the dinosaur-eating mammals, the four-winged gliders, the bat-winged experiments, the color patterns pulled from melanosomes older than most mountain ranges on this continent. There is a version of the past we all learned in school. Grey giants, green swamps, scales and roars, and a straight line from lizard to dragon to bone. That version is not entirely wrong, but it is not what the ash preserved. The ash preserved something stranger, something that shimmered, something that ate mammals and got eaten by them, something that tried in dozens of different bodies to invent the sky. We are not done being surprised by dinosaurs. We are, in a very real sense, just starting to understand what they actually were. Not the scaly monsters from a 1970s textbook, not the sleek reptilian killers from a 1990s movie. Something covered in feathers, something with a color scheme and a mating display and a body temperature and a brain that was doing things we haven't fully figured out yet. The bones in Liaoning have been waiting 125 million years to tell us this. The crew, still working the quarry, is only halfway through listening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.